After the Homestuck pilot was announced, I spent about a month reading the entire comic in anticipation of the pilot's release, and I did manage to finish on time. So what did I think? I thought the pilot was good. I liked it. Whatever smaller problems I have, I feel like could probably be fixed if the series gets greenlit and we get a proper first episode, since this is only half the length of a full episode. A common opinion I've seen from people is interest marked with confusion. People are generally aware of Homestuck because of the legacy that it has. I think it's fair to say that a chunk of the attention that this pilot is getting is coming from Toby Fox. Toby having worked on Homestuck back when it was running, and ever since being a vocal fan of Homestuck, I guess I'd say.
This is her special super-duper Homestuck typing quirk. I guess a muscular horse that attacks you with sweat is pretty Homestuck, and her red Vriska shoes, she has a lot of elements from the trolls of Homestuck. Jade Harley as Manticore.
The point is, there's renewed interest in Homestuck. I got into it. Other people are probably going to be getting into it. So this pilot is kinda carrying the weight of the franchise on its shoulders. From what we got, I would say there's potential.
I'd say there's potential.
I think they did pretty well with the short time that they had and a smaller budget than a full series. But due to the aforementioned confusion from a lot of people, I'm worried that this may be alienating because of how fast-paced it is and how much it throws concepts at you and how daunting Homestuck is to get into in the first place. When this series starts, it is going to be long, and the pilot really hits you with a lot. I feel like even the first season of the series is going to have to hit you with a lot, and have a lot of ground to cover. So what am I doing here with this video? What do I mean by explained without spoilers? What I want to try to do is to explain what happens in the pilot to the best of my ability, and explain, I guess, details that I feel like need or warrant explaining without giving vital plot information away that can be revealed, dramatically, instead of just by somebody saying it in a YouTube video. And there may be some disagreement about what I consider to be major or minor spoilers, but my overall purpose here is not to just compare side by side the comic to the pilot. My purpose here is to smooth things over a bit. I'm trying to help people get into Homestuck, because once I got into Homestuck, I started to really, really appreciate it, and now I'm excited by the prospect of getting a full series. I'll talk at the end about why I liked Homestuck and what I look forward to about the series, but I think this intro's gone on long enough, so let's just get into the meat of things. We open on a shot of a desert with what looks like a destroyed city in the background. There are footprints leading into some sort of station, and inside we see this little hooded character typing on a keyboard to some sort of console. Pretty early in the comic, we're told that this character is called Wayward Vagabond, and this place is just referred to as the distant future. Wayward Vagabond is pretty important to the story. I'm obviously not going to reveal how, though I promise you, whatever it is you're guessing just from looking at his role in the pilot, it's way weirder. This scene is an almost one-for-one recreation of the first page of Homestuck, which means now we have to talk about the format of Homestuck. It's going to be very relevant to this pilot. If you'll notice throughout the pilot, it seems like John in the middle of his conversations is doing kind of random bullshit. This is skipping over pages worth of content from the original comic, and the reason for that is that back when the comic was running, or at least for the first few acts until this stopped later on, initially readers were able to submit suggestions for what the characters should do next, and then the comic's creator Andrew Hussie would decide which of those suggestions to draw a page about. It was interactive. But as you'll see from some of the events in the pilot, and if you try to read the first act of Homestuck for yourself, this leads to things becoming a bit meandering and aimless until finally some plot development occurs. It's all just kinda at the whims of the people. But an important detail to note here that is actually a difference from the comic, is that when John gets his name Zeus El Pooplord entered, which is just a one-for-one gag from the comic and a name suggested by a viewer, it was a viewer that submitted that name and a sort of nameless narrator that entered it in. But we are shown quite clearly that Wandering Vagabond, in the animated adaptation at least, enters the name. Which leads me to wonder if the entire viewer suggestion concept is being reinterpreted as Wayward Vagabond and any other character we see with a similar console, typing suggestions in for characters instead of the nameless, faceless readers of the comic. This might just be a sort of necessary change for adapting into a new format, but it might also have some interesting implications for the future because there is normally a clear line drawn in the sand in the original comic when a different character is giving prompts. I can't really give more of an explanation than that this early on. I really can't explain more. I guess just bear it in mind as a weird thing the pilot seems to be doing. John then gets his first call from Dave, and now we have to stop again and keep talking about the comic. There's a chance you already know this, but if you didn't, all of the conversations seen in the comic are in these big blocks of text underneath the panels. Even though people usually call Homestuck a webcomic, that's not really what it is. It's more of like a text and image-based, multimedia, partially interactive thing. People usually just call it a webcomic because that's way easier to say. But the point is, all of the PesterChum logs, which you can see is the chat client they're using, all of the logs in the comic are just big-ass blocks of text, and so much of this comic is people sitting on computers typing to each other, in between things actually happening, or building up to things actually happening all at once, in the comic's famous flash animations. But obviously that wouldn't work very well in an animated format, just having characters sit and talk. So they find ways to make it visually interesting, playing around with the split screen, and popping up in little PesterChum windows that appear from the phone like speech bubbles, like a comic. All this fun visual stuff they do is not just great for making these conversations work in the animated format, but the fact that they're sort of playing around with the fourth wall is really good for Homestuck, because it makes you acknowledge and think about the fourth wall. Homestuck is incredibly meta to an almost nauseating degree, constantly reminding you of what it is you're reading and using its format to its advantage, in really cool ways that I will not give away, and that will probably not translate too well into an animated format, forcing them to come up with new ways of using their medium of choice to effectively convey the comic's themes and ideas. All that's just to say, this to me is the thing about the pilot that inspires the most hope for the future. They found ways to make these conversations interesting and keep the characters moving, even though they've got walls of text they're going to have to get through. I really do wonder how they're going to adapt some of this shit later on, because these conversations can get long. Anyway, there's a blink and you'll miss it joke here. Well, there's a lot of blink and you'll miss it moments in this pilot because of how fast-paced it is. But anyway, there's a blink and you'll miss it joke here where Dave also has his name entered, just like John's. Little Monsters is a real movie that exists, and also is kind of foreshadowing the Trolls. There's a lot of points in Homestuck where they reference real other things that actually exist, and some of them are actually really plot relevant, which makes me wonder how the hell they're going to skirt around copyright and parody law to get away with some of this shit. Here the narrator explains the Sylladex for me, which saves me the trouble of having to go through that, but something I will touch on is the general video gamey logic of this world they live in, where they have, like, an inventory system and big, bombastic, Scott Pilgrim-ass fight scenes. This is another sort of point of confusion for new viewers, and really, I don't have much of an explanation I can give. You've got to just accept it. This is just what this world is like. The narrator doesn't explain how Dave's fetch modus works. They probably will have to in the full series in order for some jokes to work, but don't worry about it. This is just to establish that every character has a different, somewhat inconvenient inventory system. John's fake arms are a visual gag that don't really work in the animated adaptation because the way Homestuck characters are drawn sometimes is they're drawn without arms, only sprouting them spontaneously when they need to use them. But John's rubber arms do come up later, so they couldn't just omit it. Anyway, that's why he has a pair of rubber arms. This is sort of a equipment system you'll see in video games. Every character can only have one type of weapon. Anyway, here Dave finally gets to the point of the conversation, and sort of the point of this whole pilot is John trying to get his mail. But he doesn't want to deal with his dad, for reasons that are not really made clear in this pilot, and there isn't really a reason I can provide. John's just kinda like this. The beta that Dave is talking about is the game Suburb, which the story of Homestuck pretty much revolves around. And hey, if these guys already live in a world with video game systems like an inventory or equipment, what is an actual video game like in a world that already basically is a video game? While John is talking to Rose, he seems to stop in the middle of his self-proclaimed stealth mission to put his fake arms onto this doll for seemingly no reason. This was another viewer-suggested thing. See, I feel like it was relevant to explain the viewer suggestion system, because without it, if you're just watching this for the first time and you're trying to follow along with what's happening, like, why the fuck would John do that? John's dialogue about sticking his hand up his mailbox's ass is not a direct quote from the comic, but this is kind of the general tone of a lot of the conversations in the comic, though this does feel like more of a Dave thing to say. This thing where Rose sneaks out of her room isn't really verbally acknowledged. She's just having some issues with her internet connectivity and is moving somewhere else in the house to get a better signal. This is another thing the pilot sort of adapts, but doesn't really follow up on. This scene where she sneaks past her mother is almost directly lifted from the comic. John mentions that he doesn't ask his dad for things for the same reason Rose doesn't ask her mom. Dave also mentions his bro, and Jade mentions her grandfather. All of the kids have one guardian and no other family that we're told of, except for John's Nana, whose ashes are above the fireplace. I'm bringing this up just because it's relevant to the story as a whole, not because it's especially relevant to the pilot, but I think anyone can tell that there's a pattern that they're trying to establish with these kids and their guardians. This pilot throws a lot of characters at you pretty fast, but this is the last of our main 4, which are on all the promotional material and merchandise. I mean, besides Carcat, he's there too. The dialogue from the narrator here is lifted directly from the comic. It's one of, if not the first panels with sound. It's supposed to be a dramatic moment that kind of sets up the rest of the comic with the title drop and everything, but it gets cut short for time and for comedy. So John sees that one package he got in the mail and one copy of Suburb is in his dad's car. Meanwhile, another package he got and another copy of Suburb is in the kitchen. And they don't directly mention in the pilot that John has 2 envelopes with 2 copies of the game, though that is relevant to the story, it's just not brought up here. I won't explain why it's relevant, but just bear it in mind. It wasn't an animation mistake. It's not entirely clear because the characters play around with the fourth wall and, like, appearing to talk to each other, and then Rose isn't able to see John's disguise, but then they still sort of turn to look at each other relative on the screen. Just to be clear, they can't see each other. These aren't video calls. So when there's a loud noise and John reacts to it like he heard it and looks in the other direction as if it was coming from that direction, it was just coming from his phone. There was a loud crashing noise on Jade's end of the call. I don't know if this confused people, but with the breakneck pace of the pilot, I feel like it could confuse people. Okay, John sees, 3 different things up in the sky here. The title drop, which they were talking about. An arm, which I'm not going anywhere near that. I'm not even going to touch that. And then the meteor, which we see the meteor here, and earlier we saw some meteors pass by Rose's house, but after this point the meteor doesn't appear again at any point in the pilot, so it's just kind of a thing that happens and then we move on. It almost makes me wonder why they even bothered to show this in the pilot, because in the comic this doesn't happen until later, and it's not like they had time to pay this off over the course of the pilot. The whole bit just seemed like kind of a waste of time to me, and only further added to the confusion of what the fuck is even going on. I don't know, maybe they felt like it was important to include. But yeah, if it wasn't clear from the giant-ass meteor and the giant meteors plural outside Rose's house, Homestuck is about the apocalypse. Actually, that's oversimplifying things. The apocalypse is... We've got bigger problems and bigger stakes than the apocalypse going on, alright? And now we have the strife sequence with John's dad, which I'm not going to break down beat for beat. I just wanted to point out that this is very different from the one in the comic, and I think there's a good reason for that. Not that this fight really needed to be ramped up, because it's a big, dramatic moment in the story. It's really not. It's just kind of a weird gag. But the reason I really think that they amped up the animation for this was to sort of tease what future fights later on in the story could look like if the series got greenlit. Reminder that this is a pilot, this is not a first episode, this is just like a teaser of what this series could be. But yeah, if you're paying attention, John is trying to attack his father with a hammer, and all his dad really is trying to do is give him cake. Very forcefully give him cake, but, he's just doting on him. This attack text says "Dote Smite." John's Silodex uses a stack modus. We see Dave uses hash map, and we don't get to see what Rose or Jade use, but we do see Dad summon a fuckload of brown capture cards. That's because his dad's fetch modus is wallet. This isn't really a spoiler of any kind, I just think that's funny. John and Dave have actual data structures that are used in computer science, then Dad Egbert just has wallet. I really love this thing they keep doing where his dad defaults to this one pose and just kind of slides around. It's reflective of the way a lot of the animation was in the comic, where characters would just hold a pose and slide around. This is something that's explained in a bit more detail in the original comic, but what's happening here is that John's big-ass family joke book is falling onto a few smoke bomb pellets, and that's what causes the big explosion. In this somewhat clunky dialogue, John says, "Wow, Jade, it's like you can see the future." And I mean, gee, I wonder. The camera zooms out so that we can see the wayward vagabond again, and we can see that one of his other 4 monitors can be switched on. And on that monitor you can see Jade. You go ahead and use your imagination for what the other 2 monitors do. So when we move over to Jade, we see that she is asleep, even though she was literally just talking to John and has been talking to him throughout this episode. So how is she asleep? Well, the camera pulls out and we see the island on which she lives, and there is a figure with the same stupid banana shape in its hair floating above Jade's island. And parallel to that, seemingly somewhere else, is another figure with Jade's stupid banana hair. The Jade that's asleep, the Jade that's a robot, and the Jade that's wearing the gold dress, these are all Jade. Then we get this little, I guess you could call it a sizzle reel of future events from the first few acts of Homestuck. Obviously, if I'm not spoiling shit, I'm not going to be able to explain what we're looking at. Few things I want to point out, though. One thing worth mentioning is that we see another terminal with 12 screens, only one of them lit up. There's also pretty clearly a different guy at the keyboard. We see Carcat, who, going into this, we knew was going to have a speaking role in the trailer and featured in the merchandise, even though he barely shows up in the pilot itself. These characters are trolls. Throughout the early parts of Homestuck, before these characters were ever shown on screen, we would get chat logs from characters who we are told are trolls. And so you think internet trolls, you think people. But nah, they're actual aliens called trolls. I'm not going to explain who any of them are, except for Carcat, because he's in the credits and he has a line of dialogue.
That's it? 1 line?
Okay, 2 lines. But because the pilot has to sort of tease what the rest of the series will be, and because the trolls take a while to actually show up, and because the trolls are some of the most popular characters, it makes sense as kind of like a jangling keys strategy to be like, look, these guys? The guys that all the cosplayers cosplay? Look, there they are. So that's it. I feel like that's all of the relevant information I can give to help make the pilot make slightly more sense without just giving the whole deal away. And I mean, you would certainly understand the pilot a lot better if you read the comic, which is currently being re-released. At the time the pilot released, you had just about enough information to understand most of what was in the pilot. By now, more has been released, because I took a while to make this video. I procrastinated a lot. But should you read the comic? Is it any good? I'm gonna say yeah. Homestuck has a bit of a reputation it carries around that I don't think it deserves. I enjoyed the comic quite a bit. The appeal to me is that it has really likable characters. It really is a shame that people don't seem to like Dave, because Dave is one of the best written characters in Homestuck. But something about putting a voice to it, or maybe just the way that the character was portrayed, it didn't really sell what makes him likable. And granted, they didn't have very much time to, get deep into it. I don't know how well this pilot instilled faith in people that the series that may follow will be any good, but it instilled faith in me. From the fact that they've demonstrated how much content they can condense, even though obviously this is too condensed, still showing that you can adapt this kind of weird, slow-boil comic into something a bit more akin to a normal cartoon, a way of turning big text dumps into more natural conversations where the characters are doing more than just sitting and talking. I don't know, I'm a new fan. I'm in like a, honeymoon phase where I'm super fixated on Homestuck and I'm about it, I'm excited, having a good time. But will you like Homestuck? It's gonna depend on who you are, and it's hard for me to make a recommendation to the audience when I don't have an established audience, and you don't know who I am, so you don't know my media tastes. Is it some shit like Dunkey said, that like the value of a critic is the consistency of their voice? I don't have an online presence. You don't know my voice. You don't know me. Hi, by the way, I'm Lemon Egg. Thanks for watching this far. But anyway, my point. Will you like Homestuck? Well, the best thing I can think to do is to try to compare it to other things that I like that have elements that I liked about Homestuck. I'd say in general, if you're the type of person to get into fandoms, Homestuck is at least partially about its own fandom. And Homestuck kind of laid the groundwork for what a fandom is in the modern context. If you're into shit like Undertale or Deltarune, odds are good you're gonna like Homestuck. No guarantee, but I'd say there's good odds. Especially if you like the meta-narrative aspect of Undertale and Deltarune. I'll also say that if you like Adventure Time, for its like a whimsical tone and its world building and its focus on characters, I think if you like Adventure Time, you'll probably like this series whenever it comes out. Which could be like 3 or 4 years if it gets greenlit. And then it's going to take a long-ass time for them to finish. Now, what about the comic itself? Do I recommend that you read through one of the longest pieces of English literature in existence? And that's not even to mention the 4 hours of animation. I would say if anything about Homestuck thus far has piqued your interest, if it seems like it might be up your alley or like it might have elements you could like about it, I've got to warn you that it takes a while to really get into it, and I can't guarantee that you're going to love it every step of the way, because the comic goes through a lot of changes throughout its lifespan. It's a lot of just figuring out how this world works, and figuring out who these characters are. And then suddenly there's a lot more focus on other things at other junctures in the story. Notably, Act 5 is a big shakeup, and then Act 6 is another big shakeup, and things just keep getting shaken up. So it's not really the same thing all throughout, even though all throughout it is undoubtedly Homestuck. It's one of the most unique pieces of media out there. That's part of why I think it's worth at least taking a look at. There's just nothing else like it. So if you're a new Homestuck fan, let me know if this video helped with your understanding at all. Let me know if you're looking forward to the series. And if there's any old heads in the chat, tell me if I missed something glaring, or tell me if I revealed too much, and let me know what you think of the pilot or of a potential full series. I think that's all I had to say. I'm sure I'll remember something I wanted to say after I post the video. I feel like I'm supposed to say that you should subscribe. I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do with this channel or how often I'm gonna post. But yeah, I guess subscribe if you're curious to see where this goes. In any case, that's all I got. Have a good one.